My parents always told me that family was everything. They taught me the importance of loyalty, hard work, and sticking together, no matter what. But when the day came for me to inherit something from them, I was shocked to find that they left me nothing. Not a penny, not a piece of property. Instead, they gave it all away to someone else. I was left with nothing but a broken heart, feeling like all those years of sacrifice meant nothing. Growing up, I always believed that family was the one thing that could never let me down. They were supposed to be the ones you could always count on, the ones who stood by you through thick and thin. I'd been raised with the mantra that family comes first, drilled into me from every holiday dinner, every birthday, and every family gathering. There was a sense of pride in the idea that I was part of a family that loved me unconditionally, that we had each other's backs no matter what. But as I got older, the cracks began to show. At first, they were small, barely noticeable, like my mom's occasional cold shoulder when I didn't follow through on one of her endless favors, or my dad's angry outbursts after a long day at work. I told myself it was normal, that all families had their problems. But when you're a child, you can convince yourself that everything is temporary, that things will get better with time. You don't fully understand that sometimes the cracks don't heal, they just get bigger. There were times when I felt invisible. I was the reliable one, the one who always stepped in when something needed doing, the one who cleaned up the messes that no one else wanted to handle. I never complained. I did it all out of love and a sense of duty. After all, I was taught that family was a responsibility, and I took that seriously. The problem was, I didn't realize that while I was giving everything to my family, they weren't giving much back. It was easy to overlook because the love they showed was still there, even if it wasn't always in the way I expected. But the day I found out how little I truly meant to them, how little they valued what I'd done, everything changed. And it wasn't a sudden, violent shift. It was more like the slow, inevitable realization that the foundation of everything I had believed was built on sand. Looking back, I realized just how much I had given. At the time, it didn't feel like much. It was just what I did because it was expected. Helping my parents wasn't a chore, it was a duty. Every weekend, I would go over to their house, not out of obligation, but because I knew they needed help with something, whether it was fixing the car, sorting through paperwork, or running errands they didn't want to do. And every time I showed up, I didn't question it. I sacrificed time with my friends, I sacrificed my weekends, and sometimes even my dreams just to be there for them. I thought it was a fair trade. I was part of a family, after all. We supported each other. When they needed money to cover bills, I was the one who gave it to them. When my mom was struggling to keep up with house payments, I chipped in without hesitation. I never once asked for anything in return, never once doubted that it was all worth it. I had a good job, but I also had dreams, dreams that were constantly put on the back burner. I never had time to pursue them, not because I didn't want to, but because I was needed elsewhere. And so, I gave. I gave freely, happily, thinking that this was what love was supposed to look like. After all, isn't that what we do for family? We give, and they give back, maybe not in the same way, but in their own way. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But when I found out that my parents had been making decisions behind my back, decisions that affected my future and my sense of self-worth, the sacrifices I had made suddenly felt meaningless. I had spent years pouring my energy, time, and resources into a family that hadn't even considered me worthy of their trust or respect. It wasn't the money, the gifts, or the favors that hurt. It was the realization that, despite all I had given, I was invisible to them when it mattered most. The day I found out about the will, I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. I had just finished reading the legal document, trying to keep my composure as I processed the words that stared back at me. There it was, in black and white. My parents had left everything to someone else, someone who had done less, given less, and cared less. They had left me nothing, not even a token gesture to show they appreciated the years of sacrifice I had made. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Maybe I had read it wrong. Maybe there was some mistake that could be fixed. I immediately called the lawyer, hoping for a clarification, for some kind of explanation. But no, the will was final. It was all real. My parents, the people I had devoted so much of my time and energy to, had made it clear with this document that they didn't see me as deserving of anything. I wasn't just left out of the inheritance. I was completely erased from their future plans, as if my existence didn't matter to them anymore. The anger hit me like a wave, flooding my chest, my head. I had always been the one to step in when things went wrong, the one to keep everything afloat, Yet when it came down to it, I was nothing more than a footnote in their lives. The thought of them quietly giving everything to someone else, someone who didn't even care about them the way I did, felt like a slap in the face. I tried to hold it together. I didn't want anyone to see how deeply this hurt me. But in that moment, I realized just how little they truly understood me, how little they had ever considered my feelings. I had expected love and gratitude in return for all I had done, but instead, I got nothing. It was hard to believe that the people who had raised me, who I had thought I knew so well, could do something so cold, so calculating. This wasn't just about material wealth. It was about recognition. It was about being seen, about feeling like I mattered. But I didn't matter. I was just a resource to them, something they could call on when it was convenient, and when it no longer suited their needs, I was tossed aside. It's hard to explain the depth of betrayal I felt in that moment. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing the people you've given everything to don't see you the way you thought they did. You pour years of your life into someone, thinking they'll see the sacrifices you make, but when the time comes for them to show appreciation, they choose someone else. Someone who hasn't been there for them, hasn't carried the weight of their troubles, hasn't lifted a finger to help, but they get everything. I replayed every moment in my head. All the times I had been there when they needed me, the countless hours I had spent doing things for them while pushing my own life aside. And for what? So they could leave everything to someone else. How could they be so blind, so indifferent to what I had done? The anger swelled within me, but it wasn't just anger. It was a sense of utter disillusionment. I had lived my life thinking family meant something, thinking that love and sacrifice were reciprocated with kindness and appreciation. But this was a harsh reminder that sometimes, those things don't matter. Sometimes, it's all about who's convenient to you in the moment, not about the person who's been there through the darkest times. The betrayal wasn't just about the inheritance, though. That was just the tipping point. It was about everything I had done for them over the years, the long hours at their side, the money I'd given them when they were struggling, the countless times I put my life on hold to take care of their needs. And yet, in the end, they left me with nothing. No house, no savings, no acknowledgement. I was just another bystander in their story. What stung the most was that my parents didn't even have the decency to explain themselves. They didn't sit me down and tell me why they had made this decision. Instead, I was left to find out in the coldest way possible, through a legal document. It felt like they had planned it all along, that they had already made their minds up about me. I wasn't worth their time, their money, or their love. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to scream to demand an explanation. But they were gone, and with them, my sense of security, my belief in what family meant, had vanished. All I had left was a bitter taste of betrayal, a void that nothing could fill. In the days after I read the will, the anger consumed me. It wasn't a fleeting burst of frustration. It was deep, lingering, and relentless. Every time I tried to think about something else, my mind would return to that one fact. My parents had left me nothing. Not a single penny of the things I had helped them with, not a shred of acknowledgement for everything I had sacrificed. Instead, everything had been given away, taken by someone else who had never shared in the burden. At first, I was paralyzed by the betrayal. The hurt was so overwhelming that I could barely think straight. I wanted answers, but there was no one to answer them. I tried to keep my composure, pretending like I wasn't affected by it all, but inside, the storm was raging. My anger wasn't just about the money or the property. It was about the fundamental disregard for me. It was the sense that, no matter how much I had given, no matter how much I had been there, I wasn't worthy of their trust or of any of their assets. I had worked so hard for them. Every weekend, every evening after work, I had been there, helping out, doing the things they couldn't or wouldn't do themselves. I'd swallowed my own ambitions and put aside my own dreams because I believed that one day, it would all pay off. That someday they'd appreciate my sacrifices. But now, I felt foolish for having believed that. They didn't appreciate anything I had done, they had simply taken and taken, until there was nothing left for me. What angered me even more was the way they had acted as if nothing was wrong. They hadn't even had the decency to explain why they had done it, or at least give me some kind of closure. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Was my love for them not enough? Was my dedication not enough? I had given everything for them, and they had tossed me aside without a second thought. It was as if I had been invisible. All those years of sacrifice, all those moments when I had chosen them over my own life, it had meant nothing to them. They had moved on, leaving me with nothing but a pile of broken memories and unanswered questions. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a betrayal of material things. It was a betrayal of my heart, of everything I had believed in. The anger wasn't going anywhere. It stayed with me, clouding my thoughts, making it hard to focus on anything else. It consumed my every waking moment, leaving me exhausted and bitter. I knew I needed to find a way to deal with it, but I wasn't sure how. The injustice of it all made my head spin. I didn't want to be angry forever, but in that moment, it felt impossible to let go. How could I forgive them for this? How could I ever move past something so deeply hurtful? The anger settled deep into my chest, and I knew it wasn't going to go away anytime soon. Just when I thought I couldn't feel any more hurt, the phone call came. It was my mother's lawyer, calling to let me know that my parents' estate was in financial trouble. The house had been sold, their savings were gone, and now they were asking for my help. They needed me to step in and help cover some of their debts. My mind spun as I processed the words. I hadn't even been given a chance to mourn them properly. Instead, I had been left to deal with the aftermath of their decisions, the wreckage of their choices. And now, 2 months later, they were calling me for help. My parents, who had left me nothing, who had treated me like an afterthought, were begging me to step in and save them from their own poor choices. The shock of it was almost too much to bear. They had made it clear that they didn't need me when they handed everything over to someone else. But now that they were in trouble, they wanted me back in their lives. The cruelty of it all hit me like a wave. They had taken everything from me, and now they expected me to fix their mess. At first, I wanted to refuse outright. My heart screamed that I shouldn't help them. After everything that had happened, why should I? They didn't deserve my help. But as the lawyer spoke, I could hear the desperation in his voice, a quiet plea that made me falter. He explained that my parents had made bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and now were facing financial ruin. He said they were truly sorry, and that they had realized how much they had taken me for granted. I hung up the phone, sitting in silence. The anger I had been holding onto now mixed with something else, something softer but just as painful, guilt. It was a sickening feeling, one that gnawed at my insides. I had spent so many years thinking of my parents as the ones who would always be there for me, but now it was clear that they had never truly seen me or appreciated me the way I had hoped. And yet they were asking for my help. They had no one else to turn to. I couldn't help but wonder, was this really their moment of realization, or was it just another act? Another manipulation to get me to do what they wanted, to step in and clean up their mess? The old, familiar voice in my head urged me to say no, to stand firm in my decision. But I was torn. Was it right to turn them away, or was I being selfish for holding on to my anger? I stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, lost in thought. The guilt weighed heavily on me. But as I thought about everything I had already given to them, everything I had sacrificed over the years, the answer started to feel clearer. I couldn't be the one to keep giving when I had been left with nothing. I had already been taken for granted for too long. Still, the decision wasn't easy. I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the choices they had made. And at that moment, I realized that if I was going to move forward in my life, I had to learn to say no. To protect myself, to preserve my own dignity, and to stop letting the past control me. I took a deep breath, gathered my thoughts, and prepared myself for the conversation I knew I had to have. The lawyer had given me a moment to think about it, but in reality, the decision had already been made in my mind. I wasn't going to help them, not this time. When I finally called back, my hands were shaking. My heart was racing, and my throat felt tight as I spoke the words I had been avoiding. I can't do it. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. It felt like a betrayal, even though I knew it wasn't. My parents had given me nothing, and now they expected me to fix everything. I couldn't be the one to step in and clean up their mess. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the guilt came crashing down. I had never turned my back on family before. Never. And the shame that followed was overwhelming. I kept reminding myself that they hadn't earned my help, that they had made their choices, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix them. But it didn't stop the guilt. It didn't stop the thoughts that whispered, what if this was the moment they truly realized how much they had taken me for granted? What if I could have made a difference? I replayed the conversation in my mind, wondering if I had said the right thing, if I had made the right choice. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that this was about more than money. This was about self-respect. It was about showing my parents that I wasn't going to allow myself to be treated like a resource anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their backup plan. I was their child, and I deserved to be treated with the same respect and care I had shown them. But the guilt didn't disappear. It lingered, gnawing at me in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let them down. It felt cruel to turn them away when they were in need. I could have helped them, I knew that. But I also knew that it wasn't my responsibility anymore. The responsibility to fix things, to make amends, wasn't mine. It was theirs. I had spent so many years fixing their problems, taking care of them, and putting my own life on hold. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Time for them to realize that the only way they would ever learn was if they had to pick up the pieces on their own. But the guilt stayed with me. It was an echo in my mind, a reminder that family isn't always simple. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that hurt the most, but in the end, they might be the ones that help you grow the most. When the phone rang again, my stomach twisted. I knew it was coming. After all, desperation has a way of pushing people to seek help from wherever they can. But this time, it wasn't the lawyer who called. It was my sister. Her voice was softer than I expected, laced with anxiety and vulnerability that I hadn't heard in a long time. "I know you're angry," she started, "but they're really struggling. Mom and Dad don't know what to do. I know they messed up, but they've asked me to talk to you. Please just listen." I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the soft pull of family, the desire to do the right thing despite everything inside me telling me not to. My sister's plea wasn't just for my parents, it was for herself too, for all of us. She wanted peace, resolution, and most of all, she wanted me to forgive them, to forget the hurt and help them. It was tempting, that pull. I could almost feel myself relenting, giving in, justifying helping them one last time. But then, as quickly as the temptation came, it was gone. I had already made my decision, and I wasn't going to let the weight of their mistakes push me back into a corner. My sister's voice, though sincere, wasn't enough to sway me. I had spent too many years trying to repair broken pieces for them, too many years putting their needs before my own, hoping one day it would all be worth it. "No," I said quietly, but with more certainty than I felt. "I can't keep doing this. They need to learn, they need to fix this on their own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her struggling to find the right words, to make me see things from her perspective. But I couldn't. I couldn't go back to the role I had played for so long, fixer, rescuer, the one who always gave in. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice more firm now. "I've done enough. I'm not going to be the one to fix their mistakes anymore." The conversation ended soon after that, not with a resolution, but with the cold, uncomfortable silence of two people who knew there was no going back. It wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that I didn't understand their struggle, but I had given enough of myself. And sometimes, loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their actions. I wasn't the villain in this story. I wasn't the one who made the choices that led to this moment. They were, and it was time for them to feel the weight of those choices, to realize that they couldn't just turn to me when it was convenient. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was painful but necessary. I had held my ground, and it felt like a small victory, not just for me, but for the person I had become. The one who wasn't afraid to say no, to stand up for herself, even if it meant disappointing the people she loved the most. The days following that phone call were quiet, and in the stillness, my mind often wandered back to the years I had spent giving everything to my parents. I thought about the long hours, the sacrifices, and the moments when I had set my own dreams aside to be there for them. I had done it willingly, without regret at the time. But now, in the aftermath of everything, I couldn't help but feel a wave of sadness and disbelief wash over me. How had I gotten here? How had I allowed myself to fall into the role of the family's unpaid caregiver, the one who fixed everyone else's problems, while my own were pushed aside? It wasn't just the money or the property that hurt. It was the emotional toll of being invisible, of pouring myself into relationships that didn't reciprocate. In hindsight, I saw it all more clearly. I had given them pieces of myself, my time, my energy, my care, but I had never asked for anything in return. And when the time came for them to acknowledge those sacrifices, they didn't. They had chosen someone else, and in doing so, they had made it clear that I was expendable. I had given my youth, my weekends, and my best efforts, all in the name of family. But now, I realized that while I had given them everything, I had never taken the time to ask myself what I wanted or needed. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of my own value, of my own needs. It was easier to give than to ask. easier to care for them than to care for myself. And in the process, I had forgotten that I deserved to be seen, appreciated, and loved just as much as they had. But as painful as it was, I knew that facing this truth was the first step in reclaiming my life. The anger, the guilt, the hurt, all of it was a sign that I was ready to stop being the person who always said yes, who always put everyone else first. I had spent years allowing them to dictate the terms of my life, but now I had to take control. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself, what do I need? What do I deserve? The answer wasn't simple, but it was clear. I needed to reclaim my boundaries, rebuild my self-worth, and learn to prioritize my own needs. And more than anything, I needed to forgive myself for all the years I had spent sacrificing my happiness for the sake of others. It was difficult, but it was also liberating. Letting go of the past wasn't easy. But the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that in order to move forward, I had to release the burden of being everything to everyone. The future no longer felt like a path I had to walk alone, burdened by others' needs. I could finally see a new way forward, one where I was the priority, where my dreams and aspirations mattered just as much as anyone else's. And for the first time, I felt hope. Real hope. A hope that I could create something for myself, a life where I wasn't defined by my role as a fixer or a giver. A life where I could be my own person, independent and strong. The more I thought about the years I had spent serving my family's needs, the more it became clear that I couldn't keep walking the same path. My parents had made their decisions, and in doing so, they had stripped away any sense of fairness, any sense of respect. I had already sacrificed too much to continue being the person who cleaned up their messes, who fixed the problems they created. It was time to move on. But the decision to walk away wasn't easy. It never is. The weight of family, the bond that had been built over years of shared experiences, love, and history, was hard to break. There were moments when I second-guessed myself, when I wondered if I was being too harsh, too quick to shut the door on them. Couldn't I just help one last time? Was it really worth letting go of everything for the sake of my pride? I went through these questions over and over in my mind, but each time, the answer became clearer. I wasn't walking away from love. I wasn't abandoning them, I was choosing myself. I was choosing to no longer be a puppet in their game, no longer their fallback option when things got tough. They had made their choices. Now I had to make mine. The hardest part wasn't the financial decision, it was the emotional one. There was still a part of me that wanted to help, that wanted to make everything right again. But I had to remember that helping them wasn't going to fix what was broken. It wasn't going to heal the emotional wounds they had inflicted on me over the years. And I couldn't keep putting myself in a position where I was the only one sacrificing. So I walked away. I packed up the pieces of my heart and began building a new future. One where I wasn't a servant to their expectations. One where I could breathe without feeling constantly exhausted, drained, and unappreciated. I began to focus on my own dreams, the ones I had neglected for so long, the ones that had gathered dust in the corners of my mind because I had been too busy trying to fix everyone else's problems. I didn't tell them goodbye. There was no dramatic exit, no harsh confrontation. I just stopped. I stopped calling, stopped helping, stopped giving my energy to something that was never going to be reciprocated. And in doing so, I gave myself permission to exist for the first time in a long while. It wasn't about cutting them off completely, though. It was about creating distance, about finding space where I could be myself without the constant weight of their needs pulling me down. I knew that one day, if they truly understood, they would respect my decision. But that wasn't for me to control. All I could control was my own life, my own happiness, and my own boundaries. Walking away wasn't a sign of weakness. It wasn't a moment of giving up. It was an act of strength. It was an act of self-love, a decision to stop allowing others to define my worth. And it was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was mine to write. It wasn't long before the calls started. At first, I ignored them, knowing deep down that nothing they could say would change my decision. But they kept coming, each one persistent and more desperate than the last. My mom's voice, shaky and full of emotion, left messages on my voicemail, asking if we could talk if I would please just listen. Then my dad called, too, sounding tired, regretful. For a moment I thought I might break, but I didn't. Days turned into weeks, and their calls became increasingly more apologetic. They admitted their mistakes, saying how much they regretted the way they had treated me. They talked about how they had misjudged the situation, how they hadn't realized how much they had hurt me by taking me for granted. They acknowledged that they had let me down in ways they couldn't undo. At one point, my mom even cried on the phone, telling me how sorry she was for not appreciating everything I had done for them. Despite the apologies, part of me remained firm in my decision. The hurt still lingered, and the scar from being overlooked for so long was not something that could be erased overnight. But another part of me felt the old tug. The part that wanted to forgive them, to let them back into my life with open arms, the part that missed the way things used to be, before everything became so complicated. Their regret was real, I could hear it in their voices. But I also knew that their regret wasn't enough to make me forget the years of emotional labor, the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, and the feeling of being unimportant to the people I loved the most. It wasn't enough to undo the way they had turned their backs on me when I needed recognition the most. Eventually, I picked up the phone. Not to accept their help, not to open the door to old patterns, but simply to have one final conversation, to give them the opportunity to truly understand how much I had been hurt. It wasn't about reconciling immediately, but about giving them the chance to hear me, to hear the pain in my voice. I told them how I felt, how their actions had torn me apart, and how, for the first time in my life, I had to choose myself. "We didn't realize how much we took you for granted," my mom said, "and I'm sorry we should have seen it." "I'm sorry too," my dad added. "I wish we had been better, especially with everything you've done for us." There was a long pause. I don't think they expected me to be so honest with them, but I had to be. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. They needed to understand the full impact of their actions, the way their choices had broken me. "Thank you," I said softly, though I felt the sting of unshed tears. "I need time to process all of this. I need to find my way on my own, and I can't do that with you guys in my life right now. But maybe one day. Maybe we'll talk again." I didn't know if that day would ever come, or what that reconciliation would look like. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need their forgiveness to feel complete. I was already on my way to healing. I had already forgiven myself for the years I had wasted in their shadows, and that was enough. The phone call ended, and a strange peace settled over me. I hadn't gotten the apology I had hoped for all those years ago, but I had gotten something more important. Closure. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, I could see a way forward. The days after that phone call felt like a quiet kind of chaos. There was no dramatic shift, no explosion of emotions, just an eerie calm that followed my decision. I had done what I thought was right, what I needed to do for my own well-being, but that didn't mean it was easy. Standing my ground had been the hardest thing I had ever done, and even though I was relieved, I couldn't shake the lingering weight of uncertainty. At first, there was relief. The quiet power that came from standing up for myself was something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the sense that I was no longer bound by the chains of duty and guilt, the weight of always being the one to fix things for everyone else. But that relief was quickly met with a deep, lingering sadness. I had made the right choice, but I was still grieving. I grieved for the family I had lost, for the relationships that would never be the same, for the love that was now tainted with the bitterness of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about them anymore, it was about me. I had to let go of a part of myself, the person who was always available, always willing to help, always putting everyone else first. It was painful but necessary. There were moments when I still wished things had turned out differently. There were moments when I missed the way things used to be, before the betrayal, before the hurt. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. Slowly, I realized that the person I had been, the one who had sacrificed so much for my family, wasn't the person I wanted to be anymore. I had spent so many years trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to make them proud, that I had lost sight of my own. The aftermath of standing my ground was quieter than I had expected. There were no grand confrontations, no dramatic declarations of anger. Instead, there was just a slow, quiet healing. I started to reclaim my time, my life, my dreams. I took up hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I started pursuing passions I had long put aside, and I began to build the life I had once neglected. And then, one day, I realized that I was okay. I had done the hard thing. I had let go of the past, let go of the people who had never truly seen me, and in doing so, I had given myself the space to breathe, to be myself, to become the person I had always wanted to be, without the weight of other people's expectations weighing me down. But it wasn't just the relief that stood out. It was the sense of strength that had come with that decision. I had fought for myself when no one else would. I had chosen to protect my own heart, to protect my own well-being, and in that, I found a strength I never knew I had. I found my own worth. There were still moments when I would think about them, about my parents, and wonder what would have happened if I had helped. But then I reminded myself that I had made the decision that was best for me. And sometimes, that's all you can do. You can't keep carrying the weight of other people's mistakes, and you can't keep trying to fix what's broken in others when you're the one who needs healing. As the weeks turned into months, something remarkable happened. I started to build a life for myself, one where I was the priority. The more I distanced myself from my family, the more I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried for years. I took time to focus on my career, my passions, and most importantly, my mental and emotional well-being. The person I had been, the one who was always there for others at the expense of myself, began to fade into the background. The first few months were difficult. I had to relearn what it meant to live for myself, without the constant need to fix everyone else's problems. I began setting boundaries where I had once allowed none, and I said no when I needed to, without feeling guilty. I stopped justifying my every decision to others, and slowly, I began to feel like I was finally in control of my life. It wasn't just about getting over the betrayal. It was about finding peace in the absence of the people who had taken so much from me. I found strength in being alone, in being independent, and in taking charge of my own happiness. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn love or approval or respect. I knew that I was worthy of all of it without having to prove myself to anyone. But there was another change that came, a quieter one. I began to forgive myself for all the years I had spent putting my family's needs above my own. I had spent so much time beating myself up, thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't doing enough. But the truth was, I had given everything I could, and it was okay to stop. It was okay to say that I had done my part, and it was time to let go. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift, and in its place, I found a sense of freedom I had never known before. I also began to see my life through a different lens. I looked at my career, my friendships, and my personal growth, and I realized that I was finally on the right path. I wasn't defined by my family or by the mistakes they had made. I was building something of my own, a life I could be proud of, where I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself. The more I focused on my own growth, the more I realized how much potential I had. The things I had once put on hold, my career goals, my personal dreams, became my driving force. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving, and it felt incredible. I started to meet new people, people who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. My friendships deepened, and I found myself building a new kind of family, one made up of individuals who genuinely cared about me, without strings attached. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. The emotional scars from the past weren't completely gone, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of how far I had come, of the strength I had discovered within myself. It was as if I had finally broken free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I was no longer the person I had been when I was tied to the past. I was someone new, someone who could choose her own path, who could set her own terms, and who could live her life on her own terms. And I realized, as I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, that I had gained something far more valuable than anything money could buy. I had gained my own freedom. There was a strange kind of peace that settled over me, but it was not the kind of peace I had imagined when I first walked away from my parents. It wasn't a perfect, comforting silence. It was the quiet after a storm, the kind where the air still feels heavy, and the ground beneath your feet hasn't quite steadied. There were days when I felt the full weight of what I had lost, not in terms of material things, but in the emotional bond that had once tied me to my family. I had chosen to move on, to let go of the past and build something for myself. But moving on doesn't mean you forget. There were moments when I missed them, missed the feeling of being needed, missed the comfort of knowing they were just a call away. Even after everything, a part of me still longed for the closeness that we had once shared. That part of me whispered that maybe, just maybe, I had been too harsh. Maybe I could have forgiven them. Maybe I could have been the one to step in and help. But each time that voice crept in, I reminded myself of the boundaries I had set. I reminded myself that sometimes, letting go was the only way to protect your own heart, to heal from the wounds that had been inflicted. I wasn't being cruel, I was being kind to myself. I had spent years giving, 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 and it was time to take. Time to reclaim my own sense of self-worth, time to stop living for others. And yet, the bitterness lingered. It wasn't just about the inheritance, or the way they had abandoned me when I needed them most. It was about the years I had spent pouring myself into a relationship that was one-sided, about the trust I had blindly given to people who didn't appreciate it. It was the realization that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had, in their own way, betrayed me. There were days when I wished I could go back, to undo everything that had happened, to restore the relationship that had once seemed so secure. But I knew that doing so would only lead to more heartache, more disappointment. The past couldn't be rewritten. And so, I held on to the lessons I had learned. I had learned that love shouldn't be unconditional at the expense of your own self-respect. I had learned that sometimes, saying no is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. In those moments when the pain of letting go felt unbearable, I reminded myself that this was the price of growth. That sometimes, moving on is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the thing that leads you to freedom. The freedom to live for yourself, the freedom to choose your own path, and the freedom to love without the burden of feeling like you have to prove your worth. And so, I moved forward, slowly, carefully, but with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer defined by the past. I was no longer bound by the guilt, the anger, or the need to fix everyone else's problems. I was free. But as free as I was, the past never fully disappeared. It stayed with me, a shadow that I couldn't shake. The bitterness of betrayal, the sadness of loss, it all lingered, a part of me that I could never completely erase. But perhaps that was the price of healing, the bitter sweetness of moving on. You can't forget the past, but you can learn to live with it, to accept it, and to let it go in your own time. And that's what I did. I let go. Not all at once, not without pain, but with the understanding that in order to move forward, sometimes you have to leave certain things behind. Looking back, I can see now that the decision to walk away, to let go of the family that had once been my whole world, was the hardest but most important choice I've ever made. It wasn't about anger or vengeance. It wasn't about closing the door and never looking back. It was about realizing that in order to grow, in order to protect myself, I had to let go of what had been holding me back. I had to let go of the idea that family should be everything, even when it wasn't reciprocated. What I learned through all of this is that self-respect comes first. No matter how much you love someone, no matter how much you've given them, your emotional well-being cannot be sacrificed at the altar of duty and responsibility. At some point, you have to realize that your happiness, your peace of mind, and your future are worth protecting. And if it means stepping away from people who have failed to see you for who you truly are, then so be it. I've learned that love doesn't have to be transactional. I had spent so much of my life thinking that love was about giving until you had nothing left, about sacrificing yourself for the happiness and well-being of others. But what I've come to realize is that love should be mutual, and it should never come at the expense of your own dignity and self-worth. If people love you, they will show it, not just with words, but with actions. They will value your time, your energy, and your sacrifices. Family doesn't always live up to the ideal we have in our minds. I grew up with this notion that family was unconditional, that no matter what, they would always be there. But the reality is that family can be just as flawed and hurtful as any other relationship. And sometimes, love is letting go of the people who continue to hurt you, even if they don't mean to. The hardest part of all of this was accepting that the love I had given was not returned in the way I had hoped. That feeling of betrayal stayed with me for a long time. But with time, I began to understand that forgiveness isn't always about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the hold that their actions have over you. It's about releasing the anger, the guilt, and the resentment so you can finally move forward with your life. Now, I find myself looking at the world with new eyes. I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened. I'm stronger, more self-assured, and I've learned how to set boundaries, something I had never known how to do before. I've learned that it's okay to say no, it's okay to walk away, and it's okay to put myself first. I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing is the most necessary thing. To stand up for yourself, even when it means disappointing the people you love. My parents' actions left a mark on me, but they didn't define me. I chose to be defined by my own actions, by the strength I found in walking away, and by the growth that came from saying no. I realized that, in the end, it wasn't their approval that mattered, it was my own. And so, I move forward, not without scars, but with the wisdom that comes from living through a painful, transformative experience. I've learned the value of self-respect, the importance of boundaries, and the necessity of loving myself first. And while the past will always be a part of me, it no longer has control over my future. For anyone out there struggling with a similar situation, know this: it's okay to walk away. It's okay to put yourself first. And most importantly, it's okay to let go of what no longer serves you, even if it's family. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let go.